Hi, this is Ron Gold, and today we're dealing with the fifth and last of the generals of the Natal campaign, Sir Charles Warren. I'm making these in conjunction with 3 Tree Hill Lodge, and we are sitting here today in the lounge. On completing his studies at Woolwich, Warren was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Royal Engineers, and shortly thereafter would go to Gibraltar, where he would spend 4 years. And during his time there, he made an extremely detailed survey of the rock, produced 2 models, 8 meters long. One of these models is still on display in the museum at Gibraltar. It is highly detailed. Every single building, every street, every stream, almost every tree is in this model. A remarkable feat. And something that many years later, people could never really understand how he'd managed to make his measurements of the rock as accurately as he did. After the Gibraltar stint, he spent a year or 2 as teaching surveying at the Royal Engineering Military School, and thereafter joined the Palestine Expeditionary Fund. And he will be very involved in biblical archaeology, and he will write some books and several papers which are still referred to today as authoritative. In 1876, he will visit South Africa the first time as Special Commissioner, and it is possibly Sir Charles Warren that we have to thank for surveying the diamond fields out of the Free State into Griqualand West, which in due time would be annexed by the British. During his time here, he gets involved in policing duties, to checking on cattle thieves that were coming out from Bechuanaland, and he will also lead an expedition into Bechuanaland to establish the boundaries of that protectorate. And one of the reasons for that was to try to stop German incursion from the west. In 1886, he was appointed Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. It was a time when the police in London drew their commissioners from the military, so that appointment wasn't that surprising. And during this time, it is said that he infuriated, or possibly amused, his junior officers by issuing his orders in rhyming verse. I have an example here. The Commissioner has noted signs of wear on the Land-Sea Lines in Trafalgar Square. Unauthorized persons are forbidden to climb on the Land-Sea Lines at any time. Delightfully eccentric, the Brits are. He would eventually resign his position on 2 accounts. One is on a day known as Bloody Sunday. A group of Marxists demonstrating at Trafalgar Square refused to disperse when the police ordered them to. Warren called out the army. It didn't make much difference. He ordered them to fix bayonets and brandish their bayonets. That made no much difference. So he said, load. And junior officers suddenly realized that Warren was on the brink of urging British soldiers to shoot down British citizens in Trafalgar Square. Fortunately, the situation was defused. The other area where he came in for criticism was over the notorious Jack the Ripper murders, and they happened on his beat. And Warren, who was a staunch Freemason, was suspected in certain quarters of arranging a cover-up, and that the murderer was indeed a Freemason. And Warren made quite certain that he wasn't investigated. Well, believe that or not, as you may. There are so many conspiracy theories over the Jack the Ripper. This is simply another one. After his resignation from the Metropolitan Police, he would serve for a few years as garrison commander, first in Singapore and then in the Thames district in England, before in 1897 being promoted to Lieutenant General and placed on the reserve list. And so when the war clouds began to gather in 1899, it is said that he penned a little note to the Commander-in-Chief, Garnet Wolseley, along the lines of, I believe there's a little show on in Africa. If I can render some small service to Her Majesty, I would be delighted to be considered. To his and many other people's amazement, he is offered the command of the 5th Division. But he said, I've never seen 15,000 men in one place in my life. Well, Sir Charles, now you have. So Charles Warren, and arriving in Cape Town with his division, which was meant, in fact, to move up the line towards Kimberley, is summoned to report to Natal under the command of General Sir Redvers Buller. These 2 men's characters were far too similar. They were abrasive, difficult, and argumentative, and the scene was set for fireworks. Buller had recently had his confidence severely dented by the defeated Colenso, and frankly, he throws Sir Charles under the bus. Rather than take responsibility himself for breaking through the Boer line on the north bank of the Tugela, he gives that task to Sir Charles as an independent command. And the key word there is independent, because what that means is that you are on your own, Sir Charles, you make it happen. And it rather seems that Buller is looking for a scapegoat. If something goes wrong this time, well, he's got someone else to blame. Be that as it may, Buller was aware that Warren did not have experience of battles. He'd never been in a battle in his life other than the odd skirmishes with Botswana cattle raiders. And Warren's lack of experience very quickly came to the fore, where he moves with ponderous slowness, takes a great deal of time worrying about getting his wagons across the river, gives the Boers all the time they needed to fortify positions in front of where he's going to make his attack. And then he will launch his troops on a fairly standard set-piece attack on the slanting hills we call rangeworthy. And he gets nowhere. And after 2 days, having suffered 400 or 500 casualties, he then decided to take the mountain of Speenkop and use it as an artillery position. Well, the Battle of Speenkop has been well explained in many books and other situations. We're not going to go to that now. Suffice to say that it was a disaster. And eventually Warren will be pulled back across the river by Buller, who reassumes command. Buller then begins to behave extremely badly, where he vilifies Warren in scathing reports that are sent not only to the War Office, but also to Field Marshal Lord Roberts. Now, you could criticize a junior officer, provided you told him that you were doing that, and Buller doesn't. And so Warren, once he discovers this, will become embroiled in arguably the greatest scandal of the war. And this animosity will drag on after the war into the peace discussions in London. For Warren himself, although Buller had stated he could never use him in an independent command again, only a few days later he does that very thing. And rather strangely, when the British make their breakthrough that will lead to the relief of Ladysmith, Buller used the plan that Warren had put together. So there was some ability there in this surveyor. After the siege of Ladysmith is uplifted, Warren is moved across to the western part of the war under Roberts's command, and frankly we hear no more about him. In August 1900 he's recalled to the UK. Within a year or two he's promoted to full general, and he will spend his retirement years becoming very involved with the Boy Scout movement. Eventually, at the ripe old age of 87, he dies of pneumonia and is buried in the UK. So that brings to an end our story of the 5 generals. And next week we may be looking at a 6th general, or we might go on to our next series, which is going to be an exploration of the facilities offered here by the Lodge.